Oh,
These are squishy chairs.
yes, very comfortable.
I might be asleep by the end.
Come and try it when you get a chance. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate all of you joining us today. The session that we've got planned for this afternoon is going to be focused on what's hot in procuretech, what's not, and what's coming up next. I'm Seb Butt, General Manager at Craft. We're a company focused on supplier intelligence. We're in the other hall, so do come and see some of my colleagues and myself. It would be great to chat to you guys. So I'm delighted and honored to be joined by Dr. Eloise Epstein today. Dr. Epstein's been in management consulting with Kearney for over 20 years, focused on procurement and helping large organizations around the world understand change management, disruption, and everything else they needed to do. As well as that, Dr. Epstein's also been the co-author of a couple of fantastic books, Disruptive Procurement, where you were a co-author, and then the author of Trade Wars, Pandemics, and Chaos a couple of years ago, which if you've not purchased already, I would thoroughly recommend people order a copy. You'll learn quite a lot.
Thank you.
A little birdie also tells me that there may be another book on the horizon, but I'm not going to spoil anything. I'll let Dr. Epstein tell us anything else later if we're nice enough. As well as all of that, Dr. Epstein also produces a fantastic spider chart every year, which looks at the ecosystem. It's already been mentioned, I think, 5 or 6 times today, but it helps us to understand kind of the ecosystem, all the different organizations. It really helps us to all have kind of our finger on the pulse. So maybe starting there, Dr. Epstein, with regards to that, what was the inspiration behind creating that map every year? And just as a second point, I think you're going to need a page 2 from next year.
Yeah. Thank you for the very kind introduction. Yes, another book is coming out in hopefully next year, and you can preview some content tomorrow at my AMA. The spider chart is a long story, but the short answer, the short version is we've never had a procurement architecture. We've always used the construct of source to pay, and about 5 or 6 years ago, it suddenly occurred to me that as we were at the dawn of the platform era for other functions, all of a sudden we needed a platform for procurement, and to simply source to contract was not it. I was making that argument long before I kind of bet my career on that idea. I got lucky. Timing certainly was part of it, and it came to fruition right about the time it coalesced with the pandemic. And even in my early versions of the spider chart, I actually have the original. I'm going to NFT it at some point and donate sell it as donation for charity someday. But even then, my thinking had evolved, because what happens is we get a lot more startups, a lot more capabilities, and the most important thing about the spider chart is the capabilities. And even though the logos are important, but the capabilities are what we as procurement need, and that allows us to then back into a procurement infrastructure, and that's very much what my work is focused on now, is defining what a procurement architecture should be, not just what the source-to-pay vendors are selling you.
Fantastic, thank you. So lots and lots of growth in procurement and procuretech over the last few years. Billions of dollars have been spent around the world investing. Some VCs, dedicated teams just to source procuretech investments right now. So huge amounts of growth there. A very rich ecosystem, as the spider map shows. What do you see happening in the next 12 to 24 months?
I see, this is going to sound contradictory, but I see 2 oppositional forces. What we're seeing, we're going to see some contraction. We've already saw quite a bit of it. And every time, just as a sidebar, every time I publish the map, I get a flood of emails. Hey, why am I not on there? Why am I not on there? Hey, you got the label, like, we're not this, we're that. And I can certainly delve into that separately. But every time, so even since the time I published it, there's a lot of corrections that have to happen, because now so-and-so is owned by this, or so-and-so got acquired. And there's reasons why I leave people on for a certain amount of time and then remove them, especially like Supplari. Well, this was the last time you'll see Supplari on there. I gave them a few cycles after getting acquired by Microsoft because they still think it is relevant. Scout came off last year. So we're going to see contraction. See, I get very distracted when we talk about the spider map. But you will see contraction. At the same time, you're going to see continued massive investment and the explosion and new startups coming all the time, because there is still a steady stream of funding. It's clear venture capitalists are all in on procuretech and supply chain tech more broadly. So this is not going to let up. However, those that started 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago and that haven't broken through, you're going to start to see them merge, partner, consolidate, et cetera.
I've read several articles. I think one of them said 30 billion was invested maybe just last year, but I've seen lots of different numbers, so I think the amount is probably truly unknown.
I used to track it in an Excel file back in 2016, or actually 2017, really. I had an Excel file with 100 rows. It wasn't even 100, it was probably like 93 rows. And I would track, and every time somebody did a Series A or B announcement, I'd put it in. And my spreadsheet just looks so quaint now when you have thousands and billions, and it's so hard to keep up. I'm preparing my coolest things for 2022. I'll be posting that in a few weeks. And I was thinking about this morning, is that one of the observations I have for this year is not only the amount of venture capital going into startups, but private equity has now put money in. And that's a very interesting trend. It's not really a good or a bad thing. It's just that really means this is a serious space.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add to that maybe just, yes, private equity, yes, venture capital, but I think corporate VC and corporate incubators as well has been a huge trend. Many organizations I've spoken to over the last few years have found the best way to leverage some of these technologies was to go out there, mop up all the startups, bring them in-house and kind of work together collaboratively, which works both ways, because you've then got all that knowledge that the procurement professionals have that the startups desperately need. So it definitely is a two-way relationship.
Absolutely, and I think underpinning that trend is the emergence of digital garages or procurement garages. Adam's out here somewhere, right there, who is famous for working with Cyril at British Telecom, and if you watched any of the videos at Digital Procurement World, the number of people on stage with their own digital garages was staggering, and it's pretty amazing. And so I'll build on this point that the corporate venture capital, in addition to these digital garages, which are also investing time and resources, is really amazing. And I think that creates this market as well, because if you didn't have digital competency within the enterprise, especially within procurement specifically, the startups wouldn't have anybody to sell to and bring them in. And this is really, it's putting the big players, SAP, Coupa, Jagger, et cetera. I'm trying to be politically delicate with them, but it's putting them on their heels because you have all this engagement from the business.
I guess that ties very well into the point that you made earlier, and maybe we'll come back to that around consolidation in the market. Maybe some of that happens with the existing players as well. Brilliant.
I think the big players are going to struggle to acquire. Maybe they pick up a few along the way, but some of the biggest acquisitions that they've made have given them indigestion as of late, and the valuations are still pretty high. So even though you might get some consolidations, I think it's a reflection that buying your way out of obsolescence isn't going to work.
Several different areas, clearly procuretech is in looking and solving problems for. The risk is one of the major ones that has been a big focus on over the last couple of years. Lots of technologies, some are supporting the industry with data, some are supporting the industry with platforms and workflow tools. There's just a huge amount of depth there. How do you think procurement professionals can perhaps use the risk solutions better?
Funny enough, this is a topic in my next book, because the way we do third-party risk today is not how we're going to do it tomorrow. In fact, I would argue we're not doing third-party risk right now. We are doing a lot of security theater, or risk theater, as I would call it. And much like the TSA, if you fly domestically here in the US, I was talking to a client earlier this week, and I'm going to use this analogy, is how do you protect a president? You create layers of concentric rings of protection, because it's not the bodyguards around the president or the Secret Service or whatever entity that's actually protecting the president. It's actually all the layers around the physical security, the police, the barricades, and then there's sort of that outer perimeter where you close off streets and you do intelligence, and it's the intelligence that feeds in to actually make the actual space that the president is in. You look at what goes on at any airport, that is at best theater, and at worst it lulls the public into a sense of false security, and that's the most dangerous place. And I say that to set up that our risk management collectively today is very much like the TSA. We are doing a lot of performative risk. We are doing signaling, and we get all these signals, and they tell us random things, and we set up workflows that nobody follows, and we try to come up with recommendations. Even my colleagues will come up with recommendations. Don't sole source. Find alternative suppliers. Really? That's the best we can come up with? Like, duh. Like, all of us, like, any MBA candidate knows that. Like, that's not, like, it's not like we haven't thought about this before, or I should say clients haven't thought about this before. That's why we need to go beyond that. And so we really need to get into what I would call risk intelligence. And risk intelligence allows us to ask different kinds of questions. It's not so much where is risk, although geographically that's important, but also when is risk. Risk, almost 90+ % of our risk is focused on the onboarding. Guess where your operational risk is? When you're transacting or offboarding these suppliers. And just as a parenthetical, if you have 30,000 suppliers, you're not managing 30,000 suppliers. I'm afraid to say it, or I'm afraid to break it to you. And so we need to move those suppliers out of our systems, because when you have 30,000 suppliers, you should have alarm bells going off in your head saying, oh my God, we are at significant risk. And you'll find that those small suppliers way down on the tail are the ones posing the biggest risk to your systems. So no, I don't think we're doing risk very well, which I don't think was quite your question, but we have a long way to go, and I think it's going to be great. And I'm not actually castigating the tools. Like, the tools are doing their job. That's their job. Our job is to take the tools and actually do something meaningful with them. And I think that's a whole discipline that has to evolve.
Absolutely. I mean,
sorry, that was a lecture. That turned into a mini lecture.
That's exactly the kind of thing we would like to learn from you. There is a knowledge gap, though. There is a gap, I guess, in understanding how to use, whether it's risk, whether it's sustainability, a topic that we'll come to in a moment as well, and then other disciplines as well. But what are the best practices that perhaps some of the procurement professionals here today could start using to closing those gaps in knowledge?
Well, certainly, the first thing is actually just look at your entire, whatever process with your suppliers, and look at it critically. And start to think, where are the gaps, where are the breaks, where are the risks? Because I guarantee you nobody's doing that. And this gets back, I'm sure you all have tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Start to look at that and start to look at where you could see threats. By the way, that's exactly what we'll do with ESG when he asks me the ESG question, is that we have to really look at this as what are we doing, what are we asking of these folks? And I'm sorry, just doing a risk questionnaire when you onboard that nobody looks at, if we're honest. And if you have 30,000 suppliers, at a minimum you have 30,000 risk assessment questionnaires. Who's really looking at those? And even if you did look at them, what are you really pulling out of that? So we need to start challenging some of these assumed, quote unquote, best practices. And the same goes for the monitoring. What are we monitoring? And what happens when we detect an anomaly? And so that's number 2. Like, those are 2 things we can start to just ask ourselves, what are we doing? And then the third one is really asking some more macro questions and thinking about it. If you have a lot of contract manufacturers, look at the number of contract manufacturers that are owned by private equity. Like that's a question that could pose significant risk down the line, or co-packaging, any of these, or 3PLs. Look at like private equity structure and vis-a-vis your supply base. These are questions that are not going to end up in a risk monitoring tool, and the risk monitoring tools will help you answer that question, but you have to frame the question, not let the tool dictate to you.
ESG and sustainability is clearly a huge topic right now. I don't know, I'll do a very quick plug. I'm part of the SPP. I think many of you here are also part of the SPP. Great. SPP is a Sustainable Procurement Pledge, started around 3 years ago by Thomas Uderson and Bertrand Concret, the CPOs of Henkel and Bayer. But it's a group of people who are all volunteers, who are all giving up their own time to come together to share best practices when it comes to sustainable practices within procurement. But it's absolutely one of the top 3 items on any CPO's agenda right now to look at sustainability and ESG. From your perspective, what would be, for those who have not started anything yet, what would be the right starting point? Because I've seen some tactical ways of approaching this, which has been, let's start to measure carbon impact, let's start to look at where's risk coming from a reputational standpoint, but perhaps less strategic and more tactical. What would you think is a good starting point?
So it's going to follow the same methodology as risk, like I just lined out, because what the tools are doing is not actually going to solve your ESG commitments. Now, are the tools a bad thing? No. However, I just got through looking through 237 ESG startups and evaluating them. And so that's how I spent my summer, at the end of my summer. And I was colossally unimpressed. And out of that 237, if you look at my spider map, the only ones I put on there were ones that were remotely interesting. Now, there's at least 10 messages waiting for me of, hey, you left me out. And so we'll see. There's probably more to come on that. But I'm colossally unimpressed by what's out there. Because again, what are you getting? You're getting questionnaires, you're getting scanning, news scanning, scoring, which are all like okay things, but that's not gonna move the needle. If you're gonna look at human rights abuses, like in my current book, Trade Wars, you gotta go put boots on the ground. You gotta look at what's happening on the factory. And by the way, not signal that you're going. You have to observe what's happening in a particular factory. So like this takes effort. You can't sit in an office in New Jersey or San Francisco and manage ESG. If you're really gonna do it, you gotta get out there. And whether it's water or carbon, it's human rights, you gotta get out there. One interesting trend that I do find that will be interesting is you're going to start to see the emergence of brand new contract manufacturing, co-pack, and third-party logistics that are going to be built ground up with a digital fabric, with an ESG fabric, that are built from the get-go. So you're not trying to apply ESG to old ways, old manufacturing. And so I'm very hopeful about that. But in terms of what to do, I think you got to be very skeptical again, especially when we talk about tier 1 suppliers. I won't make this a lecture, don't worry. But we have to, like AWS, like everybody uses AWS, Azure, or GCP. So like you have no leverage over that. So like counting that carbon, it's not like you can change or force them to do anything. They're going to do what they're going to do, and you're along for the ride. So I think we have to be very clear about that. And again, like I talked about risk intelligence, same playbook. We need ESG intelligence. And so that's going to start with having good data and actually asking better questions of the data, not just what a particular tool can tell me.
Yeah. And I would add, there's a lot of different flavors to ESG and sustainability already, and there's a lot of work for everyone to do. But then there's newer topics like biodiversity that are now starting to pick up the pace and starting to insert themselves into the agenda as well. So probably best to get on board as soon as.
Well, and this is, this is a problem in risk. So this is in this security space is called FUD, F-U-D, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And consultants love this and vendors love this because the more they can get you to fear, or there's uncertainty, inflation, recession, or doubt, you sure that's the right strategy? The more you can sell to people. So there's this whole cycle of generating fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But actually, this is why it's important to look at, because there's no shortage. When we look at risk threat vectors, we have hundreds of them. And do they all apply to your company? Maybe, maybe not. Do they all apply to, like, are there more? It's infinite. And I'm watching the same thing happen in real time with ESG. All of a sudden it was carbon. Now it's like water, biodiversity, bioaccumulation, air, this, that. So the same thing's going to happen. So you got to be very, very precise in what we're doing. And that's why I talk about intelligence, because we can't solve, every enterprise can't solve every problem. So that's one piece. So you have to prioritize, and that's really important. The other piece, and this is sort of a bit why I love Procurement Foundry, is you've got to do this at a community level. I'm going to tack back to risk for a second. The greatest risk to every enterprise not only comes through your suppliers, but it's going to be cyber risk. There's no doubt about that. That is clear. We're watching weapons-grade cyber tools be lobbed back and forth between Russia and Ukraine right now. There is no reason that those can't be used against any enterprise, and guess what? They probably already are. And they're going to be used against your suppliers that are not defended against them. So the only way, and no enterprise, I don't care how big you are, how much money you have, how many IT people, you do not have enough resources to defend against a nation state attacking a particular enterprise. It's not a fair fight. And so the only way we can survive is to do a collective defense. And those of you that watch Cobra Kai during the pandemic, that's the protect the egg defense. A few Cobra Kai fans, okay. I'm an 80s child, so what can I say? But we have to work collectively, and I think the same will be true for ESG. And you're seeing this very much in these consortiums, starting with the SPP, but also with these others, especially in the CPG and the food markets when it comes to water or cocoa or individual commodities. So I think it's very important that we start to learn and work as a community beyond the four walls. I wrote about that in my Trade Wars book. That's why I really like Procurement Foundry, because this really paved the way for community sharing. And the pandemic certainly helped bring this concept. I don't think without the pandemic and all of us sitting home alone, feeling alone, that we would have had quite the focus on community collectively that we have. And I saw somebody's LinkedIn post, I can't remember who, but that talked about being lonely in March of 2020 in April. And like, I had the same reaction. It was like, oh my God, here's this whole vibrant community of people sharing. So I took us way off topic, but I'm sure
Absolutely.
You had a question. There was a question in there, I'm sure of
You've
it.
covered it. I'm so pleased that you managed to squeeze in a Cobra Kai reference. That's amazing at a procurement conference. I'm very impressed.
Yeah. And Secret Service. We're tracking Cobra Kai. We'll see what else.
I don't envy a lot of the folks who are here today working in procurement, because there's so many different ways and directions you're being pulled. We've touched on ESG and sustainability and all of that that's coming from there. Then there's regulation, things like various acts in Germany or Norway and California, but many others are planned as well. So prioritization for our friends here must be a challenging thing. Is that something that you're addressing with people that you work with?
Well, yeah, and ultimately it comes back to the company you work for. If you work for a beer company, your job is to produce and get beer to your customers. If you work for a medical device company, your job is to create medical devices for patients. If you work for a whatever company, a bank, your job is to protect people's money, in theory at least. Thank you. So that's the priority. That's job one. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And sometimes procurement processes or best practices get in the way of the objective. The objective is always the enterprise objective of selling more beer, creating more devices, better devices, innovating whatever they are, creating new financial products and whatnot. And as long as you keep that in mind, that's job one. And everything else is just a means to that end. And I think that's what often gets lost. And especially because I'm old, having seen this, happen over the last 20 years, we've taken our eye off the ball of the enterprise. And we talk in procurement speak and design processes for procurement, or worse, for shadow finance to protect finance because they don't want to do the dirty work. So I think we need to really rethink everything. And anyway, I can go on a lecture about process intelligence, but maybe that's for tomorrow.
Brilliant. Thank you. I mean, stepping back and looking at it more broadly again, thinking of the topic of the discussion around procuretech, there's so many companies out there doing so many exciting things, but what, from your perspective, is missing? What are entrepreneurs not working on that they maybe should be?
100% what's missing is intelligence. And to some degree, I think this is going to be bespoke for every organization. At DPW, I talked about the donut hole problem. And no matter how many platforms you use, how many startups or best of breed solutions you use, you're still going to end up with a donut hole. And that donut hole is intelligence. And that's intelligence back to your, as a beer company, or intelligence for the bank, or for whomever. And I think it's really important that we have to keep that in mind. And so I would like to see more tools like augmented analytics that start to sift through massive amounts of data. I don't know, sifting through thousands of questionnaires, risk questionnaires perhaps, to deduct some patterns and tell us some information, or maybe combine that with some risk monitoring tools. That might be a good place to start. So I think that's missing. I think there's clearly the next generation of ESG tools I'm excited for. As you could probably tell, not so excited about the current set, and I have an article coming out shortly about that. So I think that's kind of one set of things I'm excited about or hopeful for. The next one is supplier experience management. And I swear to God, if I can make one change in all of this, it's that we get better supplier experiences, because, and we're starting to see this, but the amount of hoops we have to jump through as a supplier, I remember very vividly wherever Amanda is, we were talking about all the hoops that she had to go through when she started her own business, and that's stuck in my, fixated, because we onboard new suppliers and then we hand them 30-page NDAs or 60-page contracts. I mean, and yet we want diverse suppliers. Like those two don't mesh. So very excited for supplier experience management, and very much so process intelligence, because we should streamline this. This is one of my favorite pastimes, is to go to corporate sites and follow the links to the supplier portal and look at all the chaos that ensues there. It's really bad. I will find, and I will always note this when I talk to the people, usually the CPO. You have content from 2018 out there, or you have 4 logins that I have to do, or did you know I can't actually do anything without a username and password, which implies that I actually need to call somebody. Anyway, those are things. So that's number 2. Number 3 is, and I talked about this at the Forge event in the summer, but it's worth repeating, is the idea of a digital wallet for suppliers. And as a supplier, I want to own my own information, because eventually, as the platforms become more sophisticated, they're going to use my data to benefit, assuming I'm a supplier. Now it's not such a problem, because I don't think anybody's using that collective intelligence so much. But just like we've learned the hard way with Facebook and Google and Amazon and et cetera, as consumers, or we should be learning, on the supplier side, if I'm a supplier and a source-to-pay provider is using my information to make their platform better, I want to get compensated for it. That should no longer be just something I sign away. And so I'm very excited about that. And by the way, if I own the data in my wallet, just like I have my credit card on my iPhone and on my watch, then I want to be able to, I'm going to keep it up to date, which is a lot better than, hey, come to every company's portal, or even come to a centralized portal. Like ultimately, I want to bring that, ultimately bring accountability and governance for my own data. So, and I know, yeah. What's that? So those are three things that I'm really, from a startup point of view. I'm actually very excited about the procurement profession, but we can talk about that later or tomorrow.
Three fantastic ideas there. We're going to require all of you to sign NDAs before you leave. But no, those are brilliant things that folks can be working on. As with any industry, any market, there's generally a growth curve. There's kind of proliferation, there's consolidation. We touched on consolidation earlier as well, contraction as well. We've kind of seen this to an extent back in 2005 to 2010 when it comes to procurement technology. I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of how this maybe mirrors what we've seen previously, or it doesn't.
I don't think it mirrors it at all. I think there's way too much innovation happening right now. Back in 2010, you had a lot of consolidation and just solutions that ran out of gas, and so Ariba and scooped up some, and SideQuest and a couple others came together and became Jagger, and et cetera, et cetera. Bravo was floating around there. I'm definitely getting I can't remember all the details of that, but it was all just a bunch of mishmash that got consolidated together. That's not what's happening right now. This is very much the tail wagging the dog, and anybody that's in the center of my spider map is positioned to threaten the big platform providers, because it's not far from the center to just go up and down and bolt on some capabilities, and guess what? You're actually working in a modern enterprise. So there's a lot that get too far in that we might need to do NDAs, but. Or I might need to recuse myself from some, but that's the point, is that I think that's what's different, is you have legitimate competition to the big providers. Plus, as I alluded to earlier, the big providers just don't have deep pockets. I'm sorry, SAP is not going to go on a buying spree. Now, of course, I say that, and they'll probably do exactly that, but Coupa might do it, but they are very strategic in what they acquire. And then I think I'll be sort of blunt, when am I ever not? But I think Jagger, Zycus, Oracle, and Ivalua, they need to do something big. And so they could sort of disrupt that and maybe acquire a few things, but it's sort of like a Discovery Warner Brothers kind of thing, where a smaller venture just gets a lot of cash and sort of does a big merger like that. So I think you could see something like that, but ultimately I think this is a different era, a different time. And all those big providers, they lost a ton of credibility. And probably one of the trends that's shocked me the most this year is how before I say this, I have come for SAP every year since 2016. I am on record as dragging them through the mud, out to the woodshed, up the hill, tossing them, kicking them off the hill, on and on and on. But in 2022, absolutely everybody else came for SAP. I kind of backed off because I was done, and I had other things, or at least Ariba. I'm kicking them on other SAP and other things, but in Ariba, but absolutely everybody is coming for SAP now, and that's what I think is fascinating. You've seen some very direct shots at them from very significant analysts. You see it from clients. Clients are just like done with Ariba, and I think that's really telling, because Ariba is probably one of the top 2 most popular platforms, and if clients are done, they may not be moving today, but they're not going to buy into a vision where Ariba acquires a bunch of companies. So I think that's dramatically different.
And yet, still many moving to S/4HANA is something that keeps coming up in conversations that I have anyway.
Okay, so you brought it up. So my next book is going to take down big ERP. Well, it's not going to take it down. It's just going to start the trend, because we're living in a post-ERP world. We just don't know it yet. And so, or we haven't accepted it yet. So that's part of what I'm doing. And there are a lot of companies that are on the precipice of doing S4, and they're just like pausing because they know it's not going to be, they're going to spend $1 billion in 10 years for a solution that's already out of date. Now, do you have a good alternative? Well, not as of today. However, so I think it's, folks are kind of in this limbo between do we, and so I think S4 is an interesting thing because the return is not going to be there, and I think people are on to that.
Fabulous. We've got a few minutes to go. I know tomorrow Dr. Epstein is holding an AMA, which is an opportunity for all of you to ask some really tough questions and put Dr. Epstein on the spot. But we've maybe got time for a couple of questions if anyone in the audience would like to ask anything today.
Quiet crowd, okay. Okay, we got one here.
Please.
Thank you for taking pity. I can repeat the question.
Yeah, yeah.
So I completely agree with you what you said about risk management, check the box, thousands of questionnaires, blah, blah, blah. The interesting thing, and on. So in the three companies, well, I won't name them, but three companies that I've been with that have gotten a bit of trouble with different regulatory authorities. And not unusual in the sector I'm in, as you know.
Yep.
The interesting thing is the heavier the administrative process that we brought to the regulatory authorities, we got like gold stars all over the place. So though I am completely with you strategically, operationally, as you know, we're trying to redesign our whole third-party risk management process now. And we're really looking beyond the initial assessment to lifecycle management. But what are we going to, how do we influence the regulatory authorities, right? Because we could do all of that, but we'll still get stuck having to do that very heavy upfront administrative fee. So I don't want it to be an and. I'd rather do a fit for purpose kind of thing up front and then focus on the real risks. But any view that you have on that would be welcome.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll state from the get-go, that's a tough nut to crack. However, when we go to pause that for a second, my response. We've always asked for a seat at the table. Okay, so we finally are getting our seat at the table, but what do we bring to the table? We need to bring, as you have all heard me say, we need to bring data to the table. We need to bring insights and analysis. Whether it's your suppliers or your internal stakeholders like legal or finance. When you bring data to the table, it changes the discussion. We've got to do the same thing with regulators. It's not going to happen, and it's hard for an individual enterprise to go to a regulator because it looks self-serving. So I think this is where we really need to get this consortia. And so I work with a lot of European financial CPOs, and they just shake their heads when it comes the regulators. You say regulators, they all just kind of crawl under the table or they hold their head because their heads are hurting. So I think we have to come together as sort of an independent consortium and actually bring them data to show them that we're actually far more compliant than they think we are, because they always assume malintent, and perhaps the laws that everybody enacts come out of malfeasance. But I think when you start to show good practices and you bring data to the regulators, it can start to change that discussion.
Couldn't agree more, actually. I mean, just one example there as well that I have in terms of the German Supply Chain Act, which I touched on earlier. I mean, to be frank, I think a lot of the regulators are fumbling in the dark. They're still trying to figure out, and the goalposts keep moving. So for yourselves who need to commit to a strategy or what you're going to be doing next, that also needs to ends up moving back and forth as well. So I think the idea that you suggested there of presenting some facts to a less educated audience of regulators would probably be a useful exercise. One question there.
Hey, Dr. Eloise. Question from, so I'm Shachi from Bristol Myers Squibb. Question for you. The spider body in the middle of your spider diagram, what would be the direction you would recommend for enterprises to take? For them to build that spider body, or for them to partner with a third-party vendor? Or is there hope for a vendor potentially in the future who would have the internal knowledge to be able to build that body for specific enterprises?
So I'm holding out for a hero. Okay, there you go. Another 80s reference. Some of you showed your age. So I think certainly you can build it if you've got the chops in-house. And I'm featuring I'm doing a case study on another client from an next book on somebody that did just that. And that works extraordinarily well. I have half a dozen clients that have done that. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I'm really fascinated when they do it because it works really, really well. And I firmly believe, I alluded to this, that a hero will emerge from the vendors in the center, or somebody new will come in, somebody that's in stealth phase right now that I probably don't even know about. I am less convinced a third party can do it for you. I'm very skeptical of that. Prove me wrong, but I mean, again, I come from a consulting background. The goal is always to sell more, bigger, and keep your foot in the door. So, like, that's different than what like an internal group or a dedicated vendor would do. So that's my short answer.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Right.
I believe we're at time.
We are at time.
Yes.
But we'll take one more.
Take one more.
Yeah.
So you brought
don't
out my
abide by time.
hotspot, all these ERP systems. I think
Yeah.
I know of one company with 80 or 90 of them.
Yes.
Through all those acquisitions, they're running the data all different.
Yep.
So a digital transformation isn't very practical until everything's run together, and procurement needs to do something like that as it increases its impact on the C-suite and board. So if a company is in that state and they're not quite ready, is that digital twin, or is there something else that they could be doing instead to take them past that ERP phase?
Yeah, so ERP consolidation is good. I'm a big fan. It's expensive. It takes a long time, and it often becomes a boondoggle. And so that's fine. That's ERP transformation or consolidation. But I'll be clear, that's not digital transformation. And I know you didn't say that, but too many people conflate the two, and we have to separate that out, because you can actually do a digital transformation regardless of where your ERP systems are at. And part of that is creating a data layer or a data lake, and starting and going beyond just supplier, but supplier, material, product, and so forth. And actually doing the intelligence I'm talking about, creating the supplier intelligence in our realm. You can do other things too. But this is where I'm really focused, though, is that we don't have the capabilities to do that today. And those of you that have seen some of my other work recently, I'm really focused on the capabilities, because I believe let the ERP boondoggle do its thing. That's whatever crash metaphor you want to use with that, we can let that, we can watch that play out as spectators. But as practitioners, if we have the right skills and we get the access to the data to build these data lakes, we can do all the things we need to and 10 times more. That would be part of a digital transformation. And so actually, incidentally, my next book is really, okay, you've done a digital transformation, now what? Because the implicit argument there is, well, you didn't really transform around digital. What you were sold is not what you got. So here's what we need to do, and it's a little bit of that. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Like how I rewrote the agenda on the fly here.
So first, Seb and Kraft, thank you very much for being a headline or a sponsor at Procurement Foundries. Dr. Eloise, I know you've become a fixture within the procurement community. Everybody really appreciates your thought leadership and your dedication to the space. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.